A young girl in a quiet Kansas town just rebuilt a forgotten car engine buried deep in her grandfather's barn, armed with nothing but heart, determination, and a worn-out wrench. But what she uncovered inside that engine wasn't just rust and bolts. It was a 40-year-old secret that changed everything. This powerful story of how a mechanic girl gave new life to a broken car engine and restored a man's honor in the process will move you in ways you won't expect. Before we dive in, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. In the quiet farming town of Willow Creek, Kansas, where the wheat fields stretch further than the eye can see, and the wind carries memories like whispers, lived a 13-year-old girl named Sophia Blake. She wasn't the type to braid her hair or scroll on a phone all day. Sophia was born with grease in her veins and wrenches in her hands. While other kids played video games or practiced dance routines, Sophia spent her weekends in an old red barn behind her grandparents' farmhouse, sleeves rolled up, knee-deep in rusted parts and busted engines. The barn smelled like motor oil, old leather, and the past, and she loved every inch of it. She lived with her grandma Ruth and Grandpa George, a former truck mechanic who'd taught her everything he knew about carburetors and character. It was in that barn, under a thick tarp and 3 decades of dust, that she founded a 1971 Dodge Charger engine block. Seized, cracked, forgotten. But Sophia didn't see scrap. She saw a challenge, a story, a pulse. And what started as just another rebuild project would soon unearth a secret buried for 40 years. A secret no one in Willow Creek ever dared speak of again. Sophia Blake had always believed engines could talk, not with words, but in knocks, pings, and puffs of stubborn smoke. And as she stood in the middle of her grandfather's barn that rainy Saturday morning, staring down at the battered Dodge Charger engine in front of her, she heard it clear as day. Not noise, a cry. The kind of sound something makes when it's been forgotten too long. She wiped the grime from the valve cover with the sleeve of her oversized hoodie, her hands already stained with grease and time. Her grandfather, George, had only shrugged when she dragged the thing out from under the tarp. That old block's from another life, he muttered, not meeting her eyes. Best leave it be. Lottie. But Sophia never was good at leaving things, Beau. Especially broken things. Especially quiet ones. It took days just to disassemble it. The bolts groaned like they hadn't moved since disco was on the radio. The crankshaft was locked solid. Rust had eaten into the lifters like rot. But there was something about it. Something beyond the metal. Each night, as the sky turned a dusky gold, Sophia would sit on an upturned milk crate with her toolbox by her feet and parts spread out like puzzle pieces. The barn creaked with wind and memory. She didn't ask why her grandfather had buried the engine so deep in the shadows. Not yet. Instead, she listened. And on the 6th day, when she opened the old oil pan, she found it. Tucked beneath a layer of thick, black sludge wedged between the baffle and the drain plug was a small, rusted tin. She pried it open with a flathead screwdriver. Inside, wrapped in a cracked piece of wax paper, was a Polaroid. 2 young men, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning beside a gleaming '71 Charger. One of them was clearly her grandfather, younger, cleaner, eyes full of fire. The other, she had never seen him before. Behind the photo, folded in quarters and stained with oil, was a letter. In shaking cursive, it read, "To whoever finds this block, know that the truth wasn't in the crash. It was in the silence afterward. They called it reckless. They called it joyriding. But they didn't see the fire. Didn't hear the brakes give out. He didn't run. He stayed. He pulled me out. I owe him my life." Sophia blinked. She read it again, and again, and suddenly, the air in the barn felt heavier. When she walked back into the house that night, the letter clenched in her fist. Her grandfather was sitting at the kitchen table, mug in hand, staring at nothing. "I found something," she said, voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Then slowly, he looked up. His eyes were red, tired. "Wasn't supposed to be found," he said. "Who was he?" Sophia asked. George ran a hand over his face, his jaw tightening. "Caleb Foster," he finally said. "My best friend. We built that car together, every weekend. Every dime we saved." He paused. The mug trembled slightly in his grip. "We were 17 when the brakes failed coming down Mahoney Ridge. The car flipped, caught fire. I was pinned. He pulled me out. Threw me clear before it blew." Sophia's chest ached. "But the cops thought it was street racing." George nodded. "We'd been pulled over before. A few times. That car was loud, and we were kids. When they found the wreckage, I was the only one conscious. They blamed Caleb, said he was showing off, said we were careless. His parents were too poor to fight it. The papers ran with it. And that was that." Sophia looked down at the letter. "But he wasn't showing off. He saved you." Her grandfather's voice cracked. "And I never said a damn word. Not loud enough, anyway." Silence filled the room, not empty, but full, heavy. Sophia didn't speak. She just walked back to the barn, laid the photo and letter on her workbench, and picked up her wrench. This rebuild wasn't just a project anymore. It was a resurrection. Each bolt she turned became a vow. Each part cleaned was a piece of Caleb's story brought back from the shadows. And on the front of the intake manifold, just above where the carb would go, she etched a name with her engraving tool. Caleb Foster Hero, 1983. The morning Sophia Blake first fired up the rebuilt engine, the entire barn seemed to exhale. It didn't roar, not at first. It sputtered, coughed, then rumbled low like a memory waking up after too long a sleep. Sophia stood frozen, one hand still on the ignition, the other pressed against the cool steel of the intake. The Dodge Charger engine, Caleb's engine, was alive again. Her grandfather, George, stood in the corner by the workbench, arms crossed but face unguarded. He hadn't spoken much since she found the letter. Not about Caleb, not about the wreck, but that morning when the engine caught and held its breath just long enough to echo across the fields. George whispered, "Sounds just like it did the night before the accident." Sophia swallowed hard. "You think he would have wanted this?" George didn't answer right away. He stepped forward, resting a calloused hand on the block. "I think he would have wanted someone to listen." The engine wasn't the only thing to awaken that week. Word had started spreading around Willow Creek. It wasn't a big town. Rumors traveled faster than the wind that cut through the wheat fields. People heard about the girl rebuilding an engine that hadn't run since the 80s. About the letter she found. About the name carved into the manifold. Some were curious, some skeptical. A few older locals seemed uneasy. And then, one afternoon, a man came knocking. He arrived in a pale blue pickup, parked crooked in the driveway, mid-60s, pressed shirt, polished boots. He introduced himself as Marshall Dean, a former sheriff's deputy. Sophia was elbow-deep in the rebuild of the carburetor when he stepped into the barn. "You the one brought Caleb Foster's engine back from the grave?" he asked. Sophia wiped her hands on a rag, nodding slowly. "I guess I am." He looked around the barn, lips tight, eyes scanning like he was seeing ghosts. "I was first on the scene that night," he said quietly. "Mahoney Ridge, 1983. Sophia's heart skipped. "You saw the wreck." "I did more than see it." His voice lowered. "I wrote the report." She took a step back. "You blamed him." Marshall flinched. We all did. That's what we were told to do. Sophia's brow furrowed. By who? He hesitated, then said a name she didn't recognize. Chief Holloway. He didn't want heat on the department. Caleb didn't come from the right kind of family. George was unconscious, and no one else made it out. Easy to tie a bow on it and move on. Sophia's fists clenched. But I knew. Marshall whispered. I saw the drag marks. I saw how far George had been pulled. There's no way Caleb was just joyriding. He was getting his friend out of a burning car. So why didn't you say something? He exhaled. Because I was a coward. The word hung in the air, raw and ugly. Sophia looked him in the eye. It's not too late. That night. Sophia posted a copy of the letter and the photo to a local Facebook group for Willow Creek history. She didn't expect much, just to share what she'd found. Maybe let Caleb's name breathe again. But something wild happened. The post went viral, at least, for a town like Willow Creek. Comments flooded in. People who remembered Caleb. Old classmates. A woman who said he'd once helped her fix a flat tire in the rain. Then came a message request from a name Sophia didn't recognize, Ellie Foster. Caleb's sister. Now in her 50s, living 2 towns over. She asked if she could come see the engine. When Ellie arrived 2 days later, she stood silently in the doorway of the barn for almost a full minute. Her hand flew to her mouth as her eyes landed on the restored engine, clean, complete, and humming with life. He used to hum when he worked. She whispered. Same tune, over and over, like he was giving the car its heartbeat. Sophia didn't speak. She didn't need to. Ellie stepped forward, ran her fingers along the etched name, and started to cry. No one ever talked about him after it happened. She said, it was like he got erased. Thank you for bringing him back. Sophia didn't cry. Not then. But when Ellie reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope yellowed with time and said, he wrote this the week before he died, I couldn't open it. Not until now. That's when the tears came. And the engine, that old, forgotten engine, seemed to hum just a little louder. Like it knew. Someone had finally heard. Sophia Blake used to think that rebuilding an engine was about torque specs and timing belts. That if you followed the manual and trusted your tools, the machine would come back to life like clockwork. But after Ellie Foster placed that unopened letter in her hands, something shifted. This wasn't just about horsepower anymore. This was about history, about silence, about voices trapped between bolts and bearings, waiting for someone to listen close enough and care deeply enough to hear them. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She sat at her bedroom window, the letter resting unopened on her lap. The moon hung low over the Kansas fields, pouring soft silver light across her room. The envelope was addressed in slanted cursive to Ellie, if I don't make it. Her fingers trembled as she held it. Not from fear, from the weight of what it meant to carry someone else's last words. She knocked on her grandfather's door just before midnight. George sat up quickly, startled. Lottie, everything okay? Sophia stepped inside, holding out the envelope. It's from Caleb. Ellie gave it to me. I think you should be here when I read it. He didn't speak, but the way he nodded told her he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. They sat together on the worn couch in the living room, a single lamp casting warm light between them. Sophia took a breath, broke the seal, and began to read. Ellie, I hope you never have to read this. If you are, it means the car didn't hold. I know how people talk in this town. If something goes wrong, they'll say I was reckless, that I was showing off. But I need you to know that's not what happened. George and I have been working on this car for 2 years. It's our escape, our freedom. But there's been something off with the brakes. I tried fixing them yesterday, but I'm not sure it held. If something happens, don't let them bury me in shame. I didn't run from anything. I stayed. And if I saved him, if I got him out, that's enough for me. That's everything. Tell Mom I'm sorry about the lawn. Tell Dad I kept my promise. Love you always, Caleb. Sophia lowered the letter slowly. Her throat tightened. George wiped at his eyes with the sleeve of his flannel. He knew. He whispered. Even back then. He knew they'd twist it. Sophia looked over at him. So why didn't you say anything? He exhaled, long and heavy. I was 17, broken, scared, and when I tried, no one listened. By the time I got my voice back, it felt too late. Sophia reached across the couch and placed the letter gently into his hands. It's not too late now. The next day, Sophia went to the Willow Creek Town Records office with the letter, the photo, and Marshall Dean's eyewitness statement which he'd handwritten that morning and signed under oath. The woman behind the counter raised an eyebrow. You want to request an amendment to an accident report from 1983? Yes, ma'am. Sophia straightened her shoulders. I have documentation, testimony, and a whole town watching now. I think it's time someone did the right thing. What happened next surprised everyone, including Sophia. The local newspaper ran a story on the front page, Teen Mechanic Revives Engine, exposes long-buried truth. A regional journalist picked it up, then a radio station. Then a national outlet ran a segment titled, The Girl Who Heard What History Forgot. Ellie Foster, moved beyond words, donated Caleb's few remaining possessions a toolbox, a grease-stained notebook, and a cassette tape of him singing to the local museum. And George, he changed too. He started walking taller, speaking louder. The weight of guilt he'd carried for 40 years finally had a place to rest. One night, as they sat in the barn watching the sun dip behind the wheat fields, he turned to Sophia and said, You didn't just fix an engine, Lottie. You rebuilt a life. She smiled. Engines don't lie. People do. You just have to learn how to listen. And in that moment, she realized. This wasn't the end of Caleb's story. It was the beginning of hers. Sophia Blake didn't expect a letter. Not after everything. Not after the engine ran again. Caleb Foster's name was cleared, and the town had finally spoken the truth aloud after 40 years of silence. But one cool morning in late October, a thick white envelope arrived in the mail. The return address read, Midwest Institute of Automotive Technology, Outreach and Innovation Division. Her grandmother Ruth handed it to her with raised brows. Looks official? Sophia opened it carefully. Inside was a formal letter, but one sentence stood out like a flare in the dark. We'd like to formally invite Miss Sophia Blake as our keynote guest at the National Youth Restorers Conference in Chicago. She blinked. Chicago keynote. Then read further. Your work on the 1971 Dodge Charger and your discovery of Caleb Foster's legacy has sparked a national conversation. We believe your voice belongs at the forefront of what it means to restore more than just machines to restore truth. She looked up at her grandfather, who had just walked in from the barn with grease still on his cheek. They want me to speak, she said. Voice quiet. George tilted his head. Then speak. You've earned it. They flew out 2 weeks later. It was Sophia's first time on a plane, and she spent most of the flight with her forehead pressed against the window, watching clouds drift like forgotten stories across the sky. The conference was massive, held in a gleaming tech center just outside Chicago. The event brought together young inventors, restorers, and builders from all across the country. Some were working on classic cars, others were designing electric prototypes from scratch. There were panels, labs, simulators, and media everywhere. Sophia was overwhelmed until she realized something surprising. They all already knew who she was. A girl no one had paid attention to in shop class a year ago, was now being stopped in the hallway by kids holding notebooks, asking how she diagnosed engine faults by sound. Adults with PhDs leaned in when she spoke about listening to mechanical silence. Journalists took notes when she said, "Sometimes the engine isn't broken. It's just misunderstood." During her keynote, Sophia stood at the front of an auditorium full of hundreds. Her hands trembled a little, but her voice didn't. "I thought I was just fixing something that mattered to my grandfather," she said. "But I realized engines carry more than fuel. They carry memories, and when we treat them with respect, they start revealing things we never thought we'd hear." She told Caleb's story not with drama, but with reverence. And when she said, "I just listened to what the engine was trying to say," the entire room fell into silence. Then came the standing ovation. Not polite, not obligatory, the kind of applause that lives in people's bones. After the event, a woman approached her backstage. Sharp suit, warm eyes. She introduced herself as Dr. Maya Ellison, director of an experimental program at the Institute. "We're launching a youth-led field initiative," she said, "restoring not just machines, but stories, engines, letters, photographs, anything mechanical that once meant something." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Like mechanical archaeology?" "Exactly." Maya smiled. "We want you to lead it." Sophia stared at her. "I'm 13. You're also the reason Caleb Foster's name isn't buried in a file cabinet anymore. Age doesn't define insight. Listening does." George, standing behind Sophia, smiled proudly. "Told you, Lottie, you don't wait for permission. You build the road yourself." Back home in Willow Creek, the barn was no longer just a barn. It became something else, a place of learning, of healing. With help from the town and a grant from the Institute, Sophia transformed it into a community restoration workshop, free for kids, veterans, or anyone holding on to a machine that once held meaning. Every Thursday, she held open bench sessions. She taught kids how to change spark plugs. Sure, but she also asked questions like, "Do you know who owned this before you, or what did this object survive?" One boy brought in an old tractor part from his family farm. Another girl handed her a jammed cassette deck from her late father's truck. And Sophia treated each one like treasure, because now she knew the truth. Fixing something doesn't always mean making it run again. Sometimes it means making it matter again. By the time spring settled into Willow Creek, Sophia Blake wasn't just the girl who fixed that old engine. She had become something else. A voice for the quiet, a translator for the forgotten, a listener for stories no one thought to ask about anymore. But beneath the headlines and conference stages, she was still Sophia, the girl who wore the same grease-stained hoodie, still tied her hair back with the same red bandana, and still spent hours in the barn floor crossed, sleeves rolled, her fingers chasing meaning through metal. One cloudy afternoon, as wind rolled across the wheat like a warning, Sophia sat hunched over a disassembled lawnmower engine. Not because anyone asked her to, but because someone had dropped it off with a note. "This was my father's. I don't know if it matters, but it used to make him smile. Can you look?" She had learned that "can you look" often meant, "can you help me remember?" And so she looked. That's when she noticed something strange. Not in the machine, but in the corner of the barn. A boy, maybe 9 or 10, dirty sneakers, worn backpack, watching quietly from behind a stack of tires. Sophia didn't speak. She simply slid the small engine off the workbench and set it gently on the table beside her. Then patted the stool next to her. The boy hesitated, then moved closer. "Name's Jonah," he mumbled. "My teacher said you fix things." Sophia nodded. "Sometimes. Depends what's broken." He pulled something from his backpack, a rusty radio the size of a lunchbox, covered in stickers and cracks. "It was my grandpa's," Jonah said. "Stopped working last year. He used to play it every morning while he made eggs. I kinda missed the sound. Sophia took the radio into her hands like it was made of glass. She turned it over, listened to the loose rattle inside, pressed her ear to its side. "Can you fix it?" She smiled. "Let's ask it." They worked together for hours. Sophia taught Jonah how to remove screws without stripping the heads, how to clean corrosion with a Q-tip and vinegar, how to test continuity with a multimeter. At first, he barely spoke, but as the radio opened up, so did he. He talked about his grandfather, about how nobody else in his family really liked the radio. They said it was old junk. But to Jonah, it wasn't noise. "It sounded like morning," he said quietly. Sophia nodded. She knew exactly what he meant. They found the issue a broken solder at the power terminal. Jonah held the soldering iron like it might burn his future. Sophia guided his hand. And when they plugged it in, and the radio lit up with a faint hum, then crackled into the first few notes of an old country song, Jonah's eyes filled with tears. So did Sophia's. Because that's what fixing really meant now. Not perfection. Connection. That night, Sophia pulled out her notebook, the one she'd started after rebuilding Caleb's engine. She flipped past sketches of carburetors and diagrams of alternators to the back pages, where she wrote stories, not just what was fixed, but who had been heard. She wrote, Jonah, a boy with a broken radio and a memory too important to forget. He didn't ask for repairs. He asked for return. Word of Sophia's quiet gift spread further than she knew. A retired train engineer mailed her an old diesel horn, said it hadn't worked since '79. A woman from Montana sent in a letter, no machine attached, just a story. My son used to take apart clocks just to hear them tick again. He passed last year. I think he would have liked your barn. And slowly, something beautiful happened. The barn, once just a place of tools and oil, became something sacred. It buzzed with more than engines. It vibrated with meaning, with grief turned to gratitude, with things people had carried too long, finally laid down. Sophia understood now that her hands weren't just skilled. They were safe places. For old machines, for heavy hearts, for silence aching to be understood. Her grandfather, George, watched all this quietly. And one evening, as they stood under the warm amber light of the barn's old hanging lamp, he turned to her and said, "You're not just fixing what's broken, kid. You're rebuilding what people forgot could be whole." Sophia looked around at the workbenches, at the parts, at the stories, and for the first time in her life, she believed it. 1 year after Sophia Blake turned the key on Caleb Foster's engine, the barn was almost unrecognizable. The same old wooden beams still groaned in the wind. The fan in the corner still clicked every fifth rotation. The scent of grease, sawdust, and old stories still lingered like a favorite song you never quite forgot. But now, the air inside buzzed with life. There were workbenches covered in disassembled cassette players and vintage walkie-talkies. On the walls were corkboards filled with pinned Polaroid snapshots of every kid who had come through the doors with something broken in their hands, and left a little more whole. And at the center of it all stood Sophia, now 14 sleeves rolled up, her signature red bandana holding back curls that refused to be tamed. She looked out over the room filled with curious eyes. 10 kids, ranging from 7 to 15, each holding their first engine part like it was made of gold. Today's lesson, diagnosing by sound. Not just listening to the engine, listening through it. After class, Sophia sat alone in the corner, sipping from a chipped mug and writing in her notebook. She documented every detail, the hesitation in a boy's hand before tightening a bolt, the smile of a girl who reconnected a loose wire and whispered, "I did it." She had come to realize these moments mattered more than the mechanics. They were glimpses of people believing in themselves, often for the first time. And in a world that was always rushing, always talking, Sophia had learned to slow down and listen. That, she realized, was the true restoration. Later that evening, a soft knock sounded on the barn door. She looked up to see a man mid-60s, tall, shoulders curved with years. He wore a worn leather jacket and carried a small metal box under one arm. "You Sophia Blake?" he asked. She nodded slowly, setting her mug aside. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the barn like he'd just walked into a chapel. "My name's Detective Julian Hayes. I heard what you did. With Caleb Foster. With this place." Sophia stood. "I didn't do it alone." He gave a tired smile. "You listened when no one else did. That's more than I can say for most of us." He placed the metal box on the bench. The hinges squeaked as it opened. Inside was a crumpled photo of a young woman in a police uniform, standing beside a patrol car. Taped to the lid was a faded badge. "She was my partner, Officer Elaine Rayner, died in '92. They said it was a car accident. But I think there's more to it. She was investigating something off-book. Her cruiser's engine, it's still an impound. Never touched again." Sophia leaned closer. Her fingers brushed the photo. "She was following a thread." He said, "I think someone cut it short." Sophia's voice was steady. "You want me to hear what the engine has to say?" Hayes nodded. "If anyone can, it's you." That night, Sophia stood in the barn long after the lights were off. She turned to the only engine that had never left its place, Caleb still sitting in the corner like an old friend. She placed her hand on the manifold and whispered, "Looks like we're not done yet." In the weeks that followed, letters came in from across the country. Kids who had found cassette tapes in their grandparents' garages. Veterans who mailed in medals and half-fixed radios. One woman sent in an old pocket watch and a note. "This ticked for my brother until the day he left for Vietnam. I don't know why it stopped. I just miss the sound." Sophia didn't rush. She listened. Every project began the same way, not with tools but with questions. Whose hands built this? What memories live in this silence? Where does the story want to begin again? And through it all, the town of Willow Creek changed. Too. They renamed the barn the Listening Garage, installed a sign out front that read, "Restoration's Accepted Stories Welcome." And at the edge of town, beneath the tall elm tree by the War Memorial, a new plaque was added. In honor of Caleb Foster and every story that once went unheard. Sophia stood in front of it one evening, her grandfather beside her. "You've built more than engines, kid," he said, voice soft. "You've built a way back." She looked up at him. "For who?" "For all of us," he said. And as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in quiet gold, Sophia realized something powerful. Restoration doesn't end. It begins again, every time someone listens. Anyone can restore what's broken if they're willing to listen deep enough and believe boldly enough. As the sun dipped low behind the golden fields of Willow Creek, Sophia Blake closed the barn doors not to end the day, but to open the next chapter. In her notebook. She didn't sketch a blueprint or list a repair step. She wrote one word, "listen," because she knew now this gift she carried wasn't just about engines, it was about people, about stories, about giving a voice back to those who had been silenced too long. The girl who once fixed a forgotten car engine had become something greater. A restorer of legacies, a keeper of memory, a listener in a world that forgot how. And for Sophia and the ones who follow, the silence was never empty. It was waiting to be heard. The end? Up next, 2 more powerful stories that will move your heart. Click to keep listening with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe even broken things deserve a second chance.